He used a CPAP machine for his sleep apnea. Every night, he strapped it on, pressed one button, and fell asleep, believing it was helping him breathe. 8 weeks later, brain surgeons were drilling through his skull. The MRI didn't show a tumor. It showed a pocket of infection buried deep inside his brain. And here's the part that terrified his doctors. Removing it wasn't enough, because unless they discovered where the infection had started, it could come back. According to the infectious disease team, the answer may have been sitting on his nightstand the entire time. This is Hidden Pathogens.
This is Hidden Pathogens?
Mark Sullivan had lived with sleep apnea for nearly a decade. At 49, he was the kind of person everyone depended on, an operations manager in Chubbuck, Idaho, married to his wife Lisa for 22 years. Father of 2 teenagers who joked that he could fall asleep anywhere if he sat still long enough. But sleeping was never the problem. Breathing was. Before treatment, Lisa dreaded the silence. Almost every night, Mark would stop breathing in his sleep. 10 seconds, 15, sometimes longer. She would lie awake, staring into the darkness, waiting for the sound that always came next. A violent gasp. His body would jerk. Then he would keep sleeping, as if nothing had happened. "You scared me again," she whispered one night. Mark smiled without opening his eyes. "I'm still here." His sleep specialist called obstructive sleep apnea a silent disease. Every pause in breathing forced his brain to wake just enough to save his life. Mark's never remembered those moments. His body did. The prescription sounded almost too simple. A CPAP machine, a mask, a humidifier chamber, steady air delivered through the night. Within days, everything changed. The morning headaches disappeared. He stopped nodding off during meetings. His blood pressure improved. For the first time in years, Lisa slept through an entire night without waiting for him to gasp for air. The CPAP didn't feel like a medical device anymore. It felt like a miracle. For nearly 2 months, Mark believed the most dangerous part of his condition was the sleep apnea itself. He never imagined the greater danger might begin only after he pressed the power button. Like millions of Americans, using the CPAP became automatic. Every night before bed, he filled the water chamber on his CPAP, adjusted the mask, pressed start, and fell asleep within minutes. Every morning, he took the mask off, emptied the water chamber if he remembered, and left for work. The machine always looked spotless. The clear water chamber sparkled. The tubing looked perfectly clean. To Mark, that meant it was safe. He rinsed the CPAP water chamber whenever he thought about it. Sometimes he skipped a few days, sometimes longer. Cleaning the tubing seemed unnecessary. After all, nothing but air passed through it. "It just blows air," he told Lisa when she reminded him to clean it. "It can't get that dirty." Remember that sentence. Because weeks later, after surgeons opened Mark's skull, infectious disease specialists would ask Lisa an unexpected question. "Can someone bring us his CPAP machine? Not his medications, not his toothbrush, not the food in his refrigerator, the machine sitting on his nightstand." At that moment, no one in the Sullivan family understood why. After all, millions of people sleep with a CPAP every single night. Almost all of them wake up healthier the next morning. Why wouldn't Mark? For the first 2 weeks, the CPAP did exactly what it was supposed to do. Mark slept through the night. He woke up refreshed. Lisa finally stopped waking every few hours to make sure her husband was still breathing. If the story had ended there, this would have been a success story. It didn't. One Saturday morning, Mark carried the CPAP water chamber into the bathroom. He emptied it into the sink, ran it under the faucet for a few seconds, shook out the excess water, set it back on the nightstand. Good enough. The tubing stayed connected. The mask stayed exactly where it was. The weekly cleaning his instruction manual recommended could wait until next weekend. At least, that's what he told himself. Next weekend came, then another. The machine still looked brand new. The clear water chamber sparkled. The tubing was transparent. The mask didn't smell. To Mark, clean and looking clean were the same thing. Every night before bed, he filled the CPAP's water chamber, adjusted the mask over his face, pressed the power button, and breathed through the machine for 7 or 8 hours. Then he woke up feeling better. So why would he think anything was wrong? Night after night, the routine repeated. Nothing looked different. Nothing sounded different. Nothing felt different. If there was a problem, it was too small for Mark to see, and far too quiet for him to hear. 3 weeks later, he woke with a dull ache behind his eyes. He blamed stress. The next morning, it was still there. Then his nose felt unusually congested. He assumed he was catching a cold. He wasn't. So if it wasn't a cold, what had already begun growing while Mark slept? Here is what was happening inside Mark's body while he slept peacefully every night. The CPAP wasn't making him sick. Something else was. Every night, air flowed through the machine, across his nose, and into the maze of tiny air-filled spaces behind his cheeks, eyes, and forehead. His sinuses. Normally, those spaces are remarkably good at protecting themselves. A thin layer of mucus traps anything that doesn't belong. Millions of microscopic hairs, called cilia, work around the clock, sweeping those unwanted particles toward the throat, where they're swallowed and destroyed. It's one of the body's quietest defenses, and almost every day, it wins. But all defenses have a breaking point. Night after night, something microscopic kept arriving. Too small to see, too small to smell, too small to notice. Each exposure gave it another chance to cling, another chance to multiply. At first, Mark felt absolutely nothing. No fever, no severe pain, no warning that would make him call his doctor. His immune system noticed the intruder long before he did. The first white blood cells arrived expecting a quick fight. Instead, they found an enemy protected deep inside the narrow passages of his sinuses. The battle had begun. As the immune system fought back, the lining of the sinuses became inflamed. They started to swell. The tiny drainage pathways that normally flushed away mucus became narrower and narrower. What should have been washed out stayed in, and what stayed in kept growing. Every morning, Mark removed his CPAP mask and went to work. Every night, his immune system went back to war. He celebrated feeling more rested. His body celebrated nothing. Then, after weeks of fighting, the infection found something it had been searching for all along: a pathway beyond the sinuses. A pathway leading toward the brain. The distance was measured in inches. The consequences would be measured in surgeries. But if the infection was getting closer to his brain every single day, why did Mark still think he only had a stubborn cold? Mark told himself he was just run down. Too many late meetings, too many early mornings. The headache behind his right eye was annoying, but not frightening. The congestion was worse when he woke up and eased as the day went on. He convinced himself it would pass. It didn't. Lisa noticed the changes before he did. Every evening she caught him rubbing the bridge of his nose. Every morning she heard him clear his throat over and over again. "You've been doing that all week," she said. "It's probably a cold." "You've been saying that for 2 weeks." Mark shrugged. "I'll be fine." He believed it. By the 4th week, the pressure had changed. It wasn't just congestion anymore. Every time he leaned forward to tie his shoes, every time he bent over to load groceries into the car, a deep pressure pushed behind his right eye, as though something inside his face was trying to push its way out. That's when Lisa insisted he go to urgent care. The physician listened carefully as Mark described his symptoms. She checked his temperature. Normal. His oxygen level. Normal. His blood pressure. Better than it had been before he started CPAP therapy. She shined a light into his eyes. "Follow my finger." His eye movements were normal. She pressed gently over his forehead, then beneath his eyes. "Does that hurt?" "A little." She looked inside his nose. The tissue appeared swollen. Nothing about Mark suggested a medical emergency. No high fever, no confusion, no weakness, no neurological deficits. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. It looks like inflammation in your sinuses, she said. Most cases improve on their own. Use a saline rinse, stay hydrated, and take ibuprofen if you need it. If you're not feeling better in a few days, or if you develop a high fever, severe swelling, vision changes, or worsening pain, come back. Mark felt relieved. It wasn't a brain tumor, it wasn't a stroke, it wasn't anything life-threatening. At least, that's what everyone believed. Because there was one thing no one, not Mark, not Lisa, and not the physician, could see. The real problem wasn't the pressure inside his sinuses anymore. It had already started moving beyond them. So if the infection had left his sinuses, where was it going? For 3 days, Mark thought he was getting better. The ibuprofen dulled the pressure behind his eye. The congestion seemed to ease. Lisa even asked if he was finally over whatever had been bothering him. I told you it was nothing, he said. He was wrong. The following Tuesday, Mark stood at the front of a conference room, leading the weekly operations meeting. 23 employees sat around the table. A sales report glowed on the screen behind him. Halfway through his presentation, the words on the screen blurred. He blinked. His right eye refused to focus. A bolt of pain shot through the right side of his face. He stopped speaking. The room became silent. Mark? One coworker asked. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The presentation remote slipped from his hand. It hit the floor with a sharp crack. Then his coffee mug tipped over. Dark coffee spread across the quarterly reports lying on the conference table. Mark reached for the edge of the table to steady himself. His right arm wouldn't cooperate. His fingers simply stopped obeying him. A second later, his right leg gave way. He collapsed onto the floor. Someone screamed. Another employee grabbed a phone. Call 911. Mark could hear every voice around him. He understood every word. But when he tried to answer, his mouth refused to cooperate. Within minutes, paramedics rushed into the building. Can you smile for me? The left side of his face moved. The right barely twitched. Can you squeeze my hands? His left hand tightened. His right remained still. One paramedic looked at the other. We need to move. Possible stroke. The ambulance left with its lights flashing. Lisa answered an unfamiliar number while loading groceries into her car. This is Mercy Medical Center. Your husband has been brought to the emergency department. The grocery bags slipped from her hands. She never went back for them. By the time she reached the hospital, Mark had already been rushed through a CT scan. The emergency physician studied the images. Then he frowned. This didn't look like a stroke. He picked up the phone. It wasn't neurology, he called. It wasn't the stroke team. Get neurosurgery down here, he said. The nurse looked at the scan. Then back at the doctor. What did you find? He never answered. So what on Mark's brain scan made an experienced emergency physician call a brain surgeon instead of a stroke specialist? The CT scan took less than 5 minutes. Waiting for the results felt like an eternity. Lisa sat outside the imaging suite, staring at the double doors every time they opened. Every patient who came through wasn't Mark. Every minute felt longer than the last. Inside the radiology reading room, the emergency physician scrolled through Mark's brain scan, one slice at a time. He stopped, strolled back, then forward again. Something occupied the right side of Mark's brain. It wasn't bleeding. It didn't look like a stroke. The physician immediately called the on-call neuroradiologist. Within minutes, the two doctors were studying the scan together. Neither spoke for several seconds. Finally, the neuroradiologist broke the silence. There's a mass in the right frontal lobe. He measured it again. Surrounding it was a large area of swelling, pushing against healthy brain tissue. The emergency physician leaned closer. What do you think? The neuroradiologist hesitated. I can't be certain from a CT alone, but my biggest concern is a brain tumor. The room fell silent. The stroke team was canceled. Neurosurgery was called instead. An MRI was ordered immediately. No one in the emergency department was thinking about infection. No one was thinking about bacteria. No one was thinking about a CPAP machine, because brain tumors are common. A few minutes later, the emergency physician walked into the consultation room. Lisa stood before he reached the chair. "Is it a stroke?" He slowly shook his head. "No." For one brief moment, she felt relief. Then he continued. "We found a mass in Mark's brain." She felt the room disappear beneath her. "A mass?" "We won't know exactly what it is until we complete more imaging. But right now," he paused, "our biggest concern is that this may be a brain tumor." Lisa covered her mouth. Just that morning, Mark had kissed her goodbye before work. Now doctors were preparing her for the possibility that he had cancer. As nurses rushed Mark toward the MRI suite, an entire treatment plan began taking shape. Neurosurgery, oncology, possible biopsy. Everyone believed they were dealing with the same disease. Everyone, except one doctor who hadn't seen the scan yet. So what was that doctor about to notice that everyone else had missed? Within minutes, the images appeared on monitors across the hospital. The neurosurgeon reviewed them first, then the neuroradiologist, then the neurologist. The conclusion barely changed. A mass, significant swelling, most likely a brain tumor. The operating room was placed on standby. The oncology service was notified. A surgical consent form waited outside Mark's ICU room. Everything was moving toward one diagnosis. Then another physician quietly walked into the reading room. Dr. Sarah Chen. Infectious disease. She wasn't called because anyone believed Mark had an infection. She was called because before someone opens a patient's skull, every possible diagnosis deserves one last review. She stood silently in front of the MRI. No introductions, no opinions, just images. She scrolled once, then again, backwards, forwards. The room remained silent for almost a minute. Finally, the neurosurgeon spoke. "Do you see something?" Dr. Chen didn't answer immediately. Instead, she enlarged the lesion. "The capsule is unusually smooth." She clicked to the next image. "The amount of swelling doesn't match what I'd expect from a lesion this size." The neuroradiologist leaned closer. He had looked at these same images for nearly 30 minutes. Now he wasn't so sure. Dr. Chen kept scrolling. Then she asked a question that seemed completely unrelated. What changed in his life 8 weeks ago? Lisa looked confused. "I'm sorry?" "Anything. A procedure. A new diagnosis. A new medication. A new daily routine." Lisa searched her memory. Nothing. Then suddenly, oh, everyone looked at her. He was diagnosed with sleep apnea. Dr. Chen nodded. What happened after that? He started sleeping with a CPAP machine every night. The room fell silent. The neurosurgeon frowned. Until that moment, no one had considered that detail important. Dr. Chen didn't say another word. She reached for the phone. "I need 2 sets of blood cultures." She looked toward the ICU. "And start broad-spectrum IV antibiotics now." The neurosurgeon raised an eyebrow. "You think this could be infectious?" "I think if we're wrong," she looked back at Mark's scan. "Every hour we spend treating this like a tumor gives whatever is inside his skull another hour to destroy his brain." Nobody argued. Within minutes, the entire treatment plan changed. The oncology team stepped back. The operating room was told to wait. New blood samples were rushed to the laboratory. Powerful antibiotics began flowing into Mark's veins. For the first time since he collapsed, the doctors weren't asking how to remove a tumor. They were asking whether they were already too late. If Dr. Chen was right, what had been silently growing inside Mark's brain for the past 8 weeks? The first blood culture became positive the following afternoon. Not for cancer, for bacteria. The laboratory immediately notified Dr. Chen. Minutes later, the MRI was opened one more time. The images hadn't changed, the doctors had. Now they knew what they were looking at. The smooth ring surrounding the lesion, the pocket of fluid trapped inside, the massive swelling pressing against healthy brain tissue. It wasn't a brain tumor. It was a brain abscess. The neurosurgeon slowly lowered his pen. So that's why it didn't look right. Dr. Chen nodded. And now we know why he's getting worse so quickly. Lisa stared at the screen. I don't understand. How did an infection get into his brain? Dr. Chen pulled up a second CT scan. This one showed Mark's sinuses. The cavity behind his right eye was almost completely blocked. This is where it started. Lisa looked confused. But he only had a sinus infection. Most sinus infections stay exactly where they begin, Dr. Chen said. But every once in a while, one doesn't. Here is what had been happening inside Mark's body for the past 8 weeks. The bacteria had quietly multiplied inside his sinuses. With every passing day, inflammation built inside a space surrounded by thin bone. Normally, antibiotics, or the immune system, stop the infection before it spreads. But not this time. Somewhere along the way, the bacteria crossed one of the paper-thin barriers, separating the infected sinus from the tissues around the brain. Once they reached the brain, the immune system launched an all-out attack. Millions of white blood cells rushed toward the infection. Dead bacteria, living bacteria, destroyed brain cells, inflammatory fluid. Everything became trapped inside a thick capsule. That capsule was the abscess. The bacteria weren't destroying Mark's brain by eating it. His own immune system was creating a growing pocket of pressure inside a skull that had nowhere to expand. Every hour, the pressure increased. Healthy brain tissue became compressed. Blood flow began to fall. That was why he lost his speech, why his arm became weak, why he collapsed during the meeting. Lisa looked at Dr. Chen. But where did the sinus infection come from? Dr. Chen took a slow breath. We may never be able to prove the exact moment it started. She paused. But we do know one thing. The only major change in Mark's daily routine over the previous 8 weeks was the CPAP therapy. She explained that CPAP machines deliver air through a humidified system directly into the nose and upper airway. When the equipment is maintained correctly, CPAP therapy is considered very safe. But if harmful bacteria contaminate parts of the system, or if an infection is already developing in the sinuses, continuing to force humidified airflow through the nasal passages every night may contribute to ongoing irritation or complicate an existing infection. By itself, a CPAP machine is not known to cause brain abscesses, but in rare circumstances, it can become one part of a chain of events that deserves careful medical investigation. The room fell silent. For 8 weeks, Mark had gone to sleep, believing the machine was helping him breathe. No one imagined another battle was unfolding only inches away. The mystery was finally solved. But the diagnosis brought no relief, because brain abscesses aren't cured with antibiotics alone. The infection was sealed behind a thick capsule. The medicine couldn't reach enough of the bacteria fast enough. If they wanted any chance of saving Mark, there was only one option left. Someone would have to open his skull. And even that might not be enough. How do you remove an infection from the human brain without destroying the brain itself? Before we continue, if you're fascinated by real medical mysteries like this, share this video and subscribe to this channel. And if you value these videos, there's a free link in the description and pinned comment that helps support the channel. Every bit of click helps us continue researching and telling these stories, and it's completely free. Now, let's continue. Within an hour, the operating room was ready. The antibiotics were already flowing through Mark's veins. But no one in the hospital believed medicine alone could save him anymore. The abscess had become too large. The swelling inside his skull was still increasing. Every minute they waited, healthy brain tissue was being squeezed. The neurosurgeon gathered Lisa inside a quiet consultation room. He placed Mark's MRI onto the screen, then pointed to the bright ring buried deep inside the right frontal lobe. This is the abscess. His finger moved to the swollen tissue surrounding it. And this is your husband's immune system, trying to stop the infection. Lisa frowned. I thought that was a good thing. It usually is, he nodded. But the brain has one problem. It has nowhere to swell. Here is why that matters. Your brain sits inside a rigid skull. Unlike your skin, unlike your lungs, unlike almost every other organ, it cannot expand. Every drop of pus, every inflammatory cell, every millimeter of swelling has only one place to go, against the brain itself. That pressure had already begun shutting down the parts of Mark's brain responsible for movement and speech. If it continued, eventually it would begin pressing on the structures that controlled breathing and heartbeat. Lisa's face turned pale. So, what do you do? The surgeon didn't answer immediately. Then he said the words she had been dreading. We have to open his skull. He explained the procedure. A section of bone would be temporarily removed. Using computer-guided navigation, they would pass through healthy brain tissue toward the abscess. Once they reached it, they would carefully drain the infected pocket before washing the cavity with antibiotics. It sounded straightforward. It wasn't. The abscess was sitting only millimeters from brain tissue, responsible for movement and speech. One wrong movement, one unexpected bleed. One surge of swelling could permanently change the man Lisa had married, or end his life before the operation was over. But if we don't operate, the surgeon looked directly at her. I don't believe he'll survive the night. Lisa stared at the consent form. Just 12 hours earlier. She thought her husband had a migraine. Now she was being asked to authorize brain surgery. Her signature barely looked like handwriting. 30 minutes later, Mark disappeared through the operating room doors. The red surgical light switched on. Inside the operating room, the first incision was made. The surgical drill echoed through the room. A section of skull was carefully lifted away. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Then the neurosurgeon finally saw it. The abscess. It was larger than the MRI had suggested. Thick, under enormous pressure, ready with suction. The needle entered the capsule. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the abscess ruptured. Thick yellow-green pus surged through the catheter. The pressure monitor immediately began to fall. Around the operating table, no one celebrated, because draining the abscess was only the beginning. The infection had already injured surrounding brain tissue. No surgeon could remove that damage. 4 hours later, the operating room doors finally opened. Lisa stood before anyone called her name. The surgeon removed his mask. The abscess is out. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe. Then he continued, but he paused. The next 48 hours will determine whether we've saved his life. Lisa's hope returned, because neither of them knew the most dangerous part of Mark's illness hadn't happened yet. If the abscess was gone, why were the doctors still preparing Lisa for the possibility that he might not survive? For the first time in 2 days, the ICU became quiet. The pressure inside Mark's skull had finally begun to fall. The abscess was gone. The monitors settled into a steady rhythm. Even the conversations between nurses became softer. It was the first time the room no longer felt like a battlefield. Outside the ICU, Lisa sat alone with a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten or slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Mark collapsing onto the conference room floor. Then a nurse stepped into the waiting area. A small smile crossed her face. He's waking up. Lisa was already running before the sentence was finished. Mark's eyes opened slowly. The bright ICU lights forced him to squint. For several seconds, he looked completely lost. Then his eyes found Lisa. Recognition. His breathing slowed. His shoulders relaxed. He knew her. Lisa took his hand before he could reach for hers. Tears streamed down her face. You scared me. Mark managed the faintest smile. He swallowed. Sorry. His voice was weak, barely more than a whisper, but it was his voice. The room seemed to exhale. The neurosurgeon checked his pupils, asked him to squeeze both hands, asked him his name, his birthday, where he was. Mark answered every question correctly. Dr. Chen reviewed the newest laboratory results. His white blood cell count was beginning to fall. His inflammatory markers had started moving in the right direction. The antibiotics appeared to be working. She allowed herself a small smile. This is encouraging. Then she looked at Lisa. But brain abscesses can be unpredictable. We're not out of danger yet. Lisa nodded. She heard the words, but hope has a way of drowning out caution. Over the next day, Mark continued improving. His speech became clearer. His strength slowly returned. He even asked for real food instead of ice chips. The physical therapist helped him sit on the edge of the bed. A nurse joked that she'd probably have him walking laps around the ICU by the weekend. For the first time, people laughed. Lisa called everyone, his parents, his brother, friends from work. She told each of them the same thing. They got it. The surgery worked. He's getting better. That evening, Mark looked at the chair where his CPAP machine had been sitting in a hospital bag after Lisa brought it from home. He gave a tired smile. When I get home, I'm never sleeping with that thing again. Lisa laughed. So am I. Neither of them knew the machine wasn't the battle anymore. The infection was. Outside the room, Dr. Chen stood with the neurosurgeon studying a fresh CT scan. Neither of them smiled. The abscess cavity looks good, the surgeon said quietly. Dr. Chen nodded. But the swelling? She traced a finger around the edge of the image. I'm still worried. The surgeon didn't answer, because he was worried too. They ordered another neurological examination, then another scan, then more blood work. Not because Mark looked worse, because they had learned long ago that patients with brain abscesses sometimes changed without warning. Late the following night, the ICU nurse noticed something small. Mark took longer to answer her questions. She asked him to squeeze her hand. His grip wasn't as strong. She asked him what month it was. He hesitated. That hadn't happened before. She quietly paged Dr. Chen. Minutes later, Mark became unusually sleepy. His speech slowed. His left arm drifted weakly onto the bed. The bedside monitor suddenly erupted into alarms. Doctors rushed through the doorway. The nurse shined a light into Mark's eyes. One pupil reacted. The other barely moved. Get neurosurgery down here now. Lisa jumped from her chair. What happened? No one answered. A resident gently guided her into the hallway as the ICU doors slammed shut behind her. She stood there listening. Footsteps, monitors, urgent voices. Then she heard a sentence she would remember for the rest of her life. I think the pressure's rising again. Just hours earlier, everyone believed Mark was finally winning. The abscess was gone. The antibiotics were working. So why was the pressure inside his skull suddenly climbing again? What could still be killing him after everything had gone right? The neurosurgical ICU moved with terrifying speed. Within minutes, Mark was back inside the CT scanner. Lisa stood outside the heavy doors, hands clasped so tightly they hurt. She watched doctors enter. She watched doctors leave. No one looked at her. Inside the reading room, the newest scan appeared beside yesterday's. The abscess cavity looked clean, exactly as the surgeons had hoped. But something else had changed. Dr. Chen leaned closer. The swelling is worse. The neurosurgeon didn't answer. He already knew. Although the abscess had been removed, Mark's brain was still under attack. Here is what was happening inside his skull. When bacteria invade the brain, the immune system does not simply stop fighting because the infection has been drained. Millions of inflammatory cells continue releasing chemicals meant to destroy anything that doesn't belong. Inside almost any other organ, that response helps you heal. Inside the brain, it can become lethal. Every millimeter of swelling increased the pressure inside a skull that could not expand. Blood vessels became compressed. Healthy brain cells were starved of oxygen. The bacteria were losing. But the inflammation was winning. The ICU exploded into motion. Hypertonic saline, additional steroids, controlled ventilation, medication to reduce pressure inside the skull. Every treatment available was started within minutes. For a brief moment, the numbers improved. The pressure monitor slowly drifted downward. Dr. Chen looked at the neurosurgeon. "I think we're getting ahead of it." It was the first hopeful sentence anyone had spoken all night. Lisa was allowed back into the room. Mark's eyes slowly opened. They were tired, unfocused, but they found her. She rushed to his bedside. "You scared me again!" A tiny smile appeared. His fingers wrapped weakly around hers. It wasn't a strong grip. It didn't need to be. It was enough. Lisa smiled through tears. "We're going home." The room became quiet. Even the nurses smiled. For one beautiful moment, everyone believed her. Then the monitor changed. A single number began climbing. 21, 24, 28, 32. Dr. Chen looked at the screen. No, Mark's grip weakened. His eyes drifted away. The pressure inside his skull was rising again, faster this time. The medications were no longer enough. Doctors rushed back into the room. More medication, more ventilation adjustments, more desperate attempts to reduce the swelling. Nothing worked. Another CT scan confirmed what everyone feared. The inflammation had become overwhelming. Brain tissue was shifting under pressure. There was no second operation that could reverse what was happening now. The damage had already spread beyond the abscess itself. The neurosurgeon slowly lowered his head. "We've done everything we can." Lisa stared at him. No, there has to be something else. He wished there was. There wasn't. She returned to Mark's bedside. The machines were breathing for him now. His heartbeat still echoed across the monitor. She leaned close enough for only him to hear. "You don't have to keep fighting. I'm going to be okay." Whether he heard those words, no one can say. Just before sunrise, the alarm sounded one final time. Doctors rushed into the room. Chest compressions were not the answer. Another surgery was not the answer. The infection had already set into motion injuries that medicine could no longer undo. Several long minutes later, the room fell silent. A nurse reached toward the monitor. The final alarm stopped. The time of death was 5:42 a.m. Mark Reynolds was 39 years old. Long after everyone else had left, Lisa remained beside him. She held the same hand that had squeezed hers only hours before. She looked toward the corner of the room. His CPAP machine was still sitting inside its carrying bag. Clean, quiet, ordinary. It had never looked dangerous. That was the cruelest part of the entire story. The surgery had worked. The abscess had been drained. The bacteria were dying. But the damage caused by weeks of infection and relentless brain swelling had already gone too far. Sometimes, the hardest battle isn't removing the infection. It's surviving everything the infection leaves behind. And if the surgery was successful, what could anyone possibly learn from a tragedy that still ended in death? A week after Mark's funeral, Lisa walked back into their bedroom for the first time. Everything was exactly where he had left it. His watch rested on the nightstand. A half-finished novel still lay face down on his side of the bed, and beside it, his CPAP machine. The water chamber was empty. The mask was neatly folded. The hose was still connected. It looked exactly like it had every night for the past 8 weeks. Quiet, clean, ordinary. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away, not because she blamed it, but because it was the last ordinary thing they had shared before everything changed. Mark Sullivan never knew the bacteria had entered his body. He never felt them travel from an infected sinus into the tissues surrounding his brain. He never felt the abscess slowly expanding inside his skull. Week after week, it grew in silence while he went to work, spent weekends with his wife, and convinced himself the headaches would eventually disappear. That is what makes brain abscesses so dangerous. They rarely begin with catastrophe. They begin with symptoms almost anyone would ignore. A lingering sinus infection, a headache that keeps getting worse, a fever that comes and goes, feeling unusually tired. Nothing dramatic, nothing that seems to justify an emergency room visit. Until suddenly, it does. By the time weakness, confusion, difficulty speaking, vision changes, or seizures appear, the infection may already be causing dangerous pressure inside the skull. And when that happens, every hour matters. There is something else you need to know. CPAP machines save lives. Every night, millions of people use them safely to treat obstructive sleep apnea, improve their quality of life, and reduce the serious health risks of untreated sleep apnea. This story is not about being afraid of CPAP therapy. It is about respecting every medical device you use, cleaning it exactly as instructed, replacing parts when recommended, using only clean water if your model includes a humidifier, and never ignoring persistent symptoms simply because they seem unrelated. Because bacteria don't care why an opportunity exists. Only that one does. When Mark finally reached the hospital, the doctors asked the right questions. The surgeons drained the abscess. The antibiotics killed the bacteria. Modern medicine did almost everything right. But the infection had already been given 8 weeks. Sometimes, that is enough time to cause injuries that even the best doctors in the world cannot undo. Months later, Lisa was asked what she remembered most. It wasn't the ICU. It wasn't the brain surgery. It wasn't even the morning Mark died. It was something much smaller. The first headache. The one they both dismissed. If I could relive one day, she said quietly, I'd go back to that headache. No doctor can promise that an earlier diagnosis would have changed Mark's outcome. But doctors do know this. The earlier a brain abscess is recognized and treated, the better the chance of survival. That is why stories like Mark's matter, not because they are common, because they remind us how dangerous delayed symptoms can be. If a sinus infection refuses to improve, if a headache becomes unusually severe or persistent, if new confusion, weakness, trouble speaking, seizures, or unusual drowsiness appear, don't wait for tomorrow, get evaluated, and tell your doctor everything. When your symptoms started, what changed, any recent infections, any new medical treatments or devices. Sometimes, the smallest detail becomes the one that unlocks the diagnosis. Mark's story ended in the operating room. Yours doesn't have to, because sometimes the difference between going home and never coming home is recognizing that something ordinary has stopped being ordinary. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you. These stories take a lot of research to put together. If you'd like to support the channel, you'll find a free link in the description and pinned comment. Checking it out helps support future videos, and every click allows us to keep bringing these cases to the channel. Also, it's completely free. And if you learned something from this case, like, share, and subscribe for more real medical stories. And if you chose not to subscribe, leave a comment and tell me what would make these videos better. I read far more comments than you might think. This is Hidden Pathogens. I'll see you in the next video. Good night.
This is Hidden Pathogens.